Hi, in this video I want to talk about inverse functions. Now, an inverse function is a function that is reflected about the line y is equal to x. So imagine you have a function f of x that takes an input x and transforms it into an output y. So you're envisioning something like this, where we have x input, we have some kind of function or some kind of rule over here, and then we have outputs on the side. So x like 1, some rule, and then we get y out, which could be something like 3. Then we take in another function, or another input rather, we put it into that function and we get 5 out. So this is what we're imagining. We have a function f of x. Some function is being applied onto x, it is transformed, and we get the output. But now the inverse of this function will be denoted by g of x. And the inverse of this function will be taking the output back in as the input. So its inverse is denoted by g of x, takes the output y and transforms it back into the original. So this takes 3, transforms it back into 1, like this. Takes in 5, transforms it, spits out 2. So what kind of function is this? This whole process of converting f of x into g of x is called finding the inverse function. And in this lesson, we want to talk about how we can get the inverse function of f of x is equals to 2x plus 1. So 2x plus 1 is a 1-to-1 function. It is a linear function. So this means it is eligible for the inverse process. If you have a function that is one-to-many, or rather not one-to-many, because that's not a function, a many-to-one type of function, that function will not be able to retain its functional property, meaning that we will have to introduce some kind of restrictions, but we're going to talk about that just now. First of all, how do we find the inverse of this? So inverse question mark. What are the steps? Step number 1, swap x and y. So we want to swap x and y. How do we do that? We know that f of x is represented by y. So how do we swap these? We basically just change y into x and we say this is equal to 2y plus 1. Then step number 2 is the last step, make y subject of formula. So make y the subject of the formula. Then you will be complete. So how do we do this? Take 1 to the other side and divide by 2. We get y is equals to x over 2 minus 1 over 2. This is now g of x, which is the inverse function. Can be g of x, or the other notation is f prime x, like this. Actually it's like that. The inverse function is equal to x over 2 minus a half. This sign, this minus 1, shows that it is an inverse of f. So this is the process that we undertake whenever we want to find the inverse function. So in this function, whenever we input 1, y will be 3. Whenever we input 2, y will be 5. But in this function, if we input 3, we get 1 out. If we input 5, we get 2 out. So it kind of works in the opposite way that the original one does. And that's the inverse function.